Why do you keep the boy Caden? Doesn't look like he can shave, let alone hold a blade. Them McConnells will kill him with a look before they find him, Oren said, taking a nip from the flask in hand. Caden raised a heavy brow, watching his cousin and kin from over the grey mountains as they looked to the sleeping form of the boy. Surrounded by clansmen on the march, the lad was sorely out of place. He wasn't much more than a willow branch, clothed in a deerskin tunic, the one Caden had picked up from a traveling merchant on the road to this meeting place. He was a pale thing, of the sort that hated the touch of soul when the summer was in full swing. "Best piper my ears have heard. Likely the best in all the Highlands. No lie," Caden said, meaning it. "Bah," scoffed Brock, Oren's much larger cousin. "No chance that stick could blow a note, let alone a tune. Not enough air in that frame of his." Caden eased back against his travel pack and nudged the boy with his boot. "Wake a moment, lad. These heathens from over the Greys have put a stain on your honour. You must defend it." The boy darted up, eyes wide with surprise, tiny hands clenched into fists at being woken so abruptly. That earned a few chuckles from the surrounding clansmen, piquing the interest of the surrounding camp. They were only 30 strong, but would meet up with clans Dulain and MacDun before joining the southern lords at the battle to come. The Civil War had finally arrived, and the clans would settle their grudges at the Battle of Edmund's Valley. It was only a few days' march, but the day would come soon enough. "Whist, boy. There are no enemies here," Caden said, seeing the fear fade from the youth's face. "They wish to hear you play your pipes." The boy blinked, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, his hands relaxing from the clenched fists they had been. Dutifully, he placed the new chanter reed Caden had bought for him in his mouth as he gathered his bagpipes. Caden had found the lad by the River Bree when he was called upon the clan chief to champion a duel against the McConnells. Dressed in little more than rags, the boy was sitting beside the river, serenading the flowing water with a tune so pure it touched something in Caden, and he knew he was in the presence of something few would ever hear. The lad was a true master of the pipes, able to raise or cool a man's blood with the mere change of a tune. Waiting for the song to finish, he had approached the boy, offering a bit of food and coin for an evening of hearing him play. Half-starved and wary-eyed, the boy reluctantly accepted, though he spoke not a word. That evening, Caden listened to the boy play long past the setting sun, when the last note filled the night air, and the moon was at full glow amongst the stars. They turned in for the night. It was only then, when the lad moved to lay at Caden's side, hand resting on his thigh, that the swordsman realized just how the boy had survived so long, and a great anger entered the clansman. "We'll be needing none of that, lad," Caden said firmly. "I'm no beast to make a child serve those sorts of desires, and you need not lower yourself in order to survive. Not anymore. You stick with me, play your pipes, and I'll make damn sure you never have to live that way again. Do you understand me?" The boy was confused by the offer, but he nodded and went back to his own makeshift bedroll. Since then, the young boy had followed him wherever he went. Caden wasn't entirely sure why he took the boy under his protection. He was a clan champion, after all, a killer with a blade, with no family of his own to speak of. He'd taken far more lives than he had bettered. Perhaps, with this boy, Caden could make at least one life better before he passed the dark veil. "Looks like we'll have some entertainment tonight," one of the clansmen called, bringing the rest of the warriors from the camp to the main fire. The boy paid them no mind, but once he'd taken up his pipes and stood, the warriors grew quiet, save for a few hecklers in the back. The first note was a low, mournful thing that immediately drew them in before he launched into a dirge that filled their hearts with memories of the past. Shade's Tears, the song was called, and never had they heard it so masterfully played. It told the tale of enduring love and the tragedy of a god who sought the affections of a maiden fair. She had turned to a shade the moment he touched her, their love forever separated by the plains of life and death. Yet each held true to their love throughout the span of time, until time itself no longer existed. When the boy finished, the entire camp had become silent in their reverence. "A fine tune," Brock said, all hints of doubt removed from his voice. The rest of the clansmen nodded in agreement, and Caden saw the newfound respect in their eyes. The boy looked to Caden, and he gave a nod of approval. "A fine tune indeed," Caden said, as the boy carefully put his instrument away and returned to his bedroll. The next day brought heavy clouds and a stiff wind that promised rain as they followed the game trail along the craggy peaks making up the Grays. Not uncommon for the Highlands, but it would make their journey through the pass far less enjoyable. The men, however, didn't seem to mind, as Caden had asked the boy to play. Against the billowing winds on their march to the gathering grounds, the lad played the Ascension of the Deodon Sith, a spirited tune that added an extra bounce in the clansmen's steps, and kept them from uttering curses that normally accompanied such weather. Caden watched the boy, seeing how his eyes sparkled with life as he played. He dipped and swayed with the tunes, feeling the music as it coursed through him. Any other time his gray eyes bore the world weariness that was all too familiar in this world. Without the pipes, the boy simply existed. Yet when he played, there returned a certain youthful passion that Caden himself had long forgotten. "The boy should have a name," Brock said, coming alongside Caden. "Not right that he should march with us, yet we treat him not without a name." Caden shrugged. "Aye, I thought the same. But he didn't speak. Not my place to give a name when one isn't asked." Brock grunted, looking from Caden to the boy. "Lad, quit your pipes a moment. Come here." The boy stopped, and Caden saw the life fade from his eyes, along with the music, but he didn't get any closer to the large clansman. Instead, he looked to Caden first. It was only then the swordsman realized it was the boy's way of asking for permission. "Aye, lad, come over." "I wish my boys were so well behaved." "Which ones?" Orrin asked, nudging one of their kin. "The whorehouse back home has a few little bastards running around with that red hair of yours." "Piss off," Brock grumbled. The boy watched the exchange without reaction, but Caden had traveled with him long enough to notice that he held his bagpipes just a bit tighter. He was uncomfortable being addressed by these men, and Caden made sure to stand a little closer just to put him at ease. Whether the boy knew it or not, he took a step nearer Caden. "Nothing to be afraid of, lad. Just thinking about giving you a name. Is that something you'd like?" Caden asked. The boy chewed the side of his cheek, a brief moment of hesitation before he gave a shrug. It was the closest thing to an answer they were likely to receive. "Looks like a Simon," said Brock. The boy said nothing. He simply held his bagpipes and watched the clansmen converse. "I knew a Simon," Orrin said, shake of his head. "A real bastard he was. Stole one of my sheep. Boy needs a better name than that. How about Piper?" "Piper who plays the pipes?" asked another clansman, a distant cousin from Brock's side of the family. "Seems a bit much." There was a low murmur as word of the discussion traveled to those closest. The boy watched them all with practiced wariness. "He'll be called Lathan, for river, as that's where we met," Caden said. The boy glanced up at him, face serious as ever, but he gave a nod of approval. Brock grinned. "Lathan MacLaird. Our blood could use a bit more music in it after all." A flash of life sparked in Lathan's eyes. His shoulders relaxed, and he no longer hunched around his pipes. Caden, however, raised a hand, and the small column of clansmen stopped their march. "You really wish to be part of Clan MacLaird?" he asked Lathan. The boy hesitated, then nodded again. Caden hated to see him like this, after watching him warm to the new name, but matters of this nature were not to be taken lightly. "Then listen close, lad, because there is a code you must hold to be a MacLaird." "Hell, Caden, he's too young for such things," Orrin said. "Besides, who here amongst us hasn't broken it?" "It's not about never breaking the code," Caden snapped. His good nature vanished. It's about setting yourself apart from the animals of this world, and knowing that, if you do slip, you make it right. Kneeling before Lathan, so as to meet him eye to eye, he said, "When you speak, may your words be true. May your deeds be open for all to see, to ensure no shade enters your soul. Keep your wits when others lose their own, and stand for the clan before all else. Accept this, and you will be a MacLaird boy. But know that every man here will hold you to it. Do you accept these words as your own?" Lathan held Caden's gaze long and hard, and for a moment he saw the foundations of strength begin to form. The boy held a pale hand out to Caden, who took it. Upon seeing this, the nearby clansmen gave approving words, repeating the name until everyone had spoken it aloud. "Then you are now one of us, Lathan MacLaird. Be sure to honor this code as best you can, and be willing to make things right when you don't." Lathan MacLaird released Caden's hand and returned his hold to the bagpipes he carried. For a moment he seemed deep in thought. Then he placed the reed in his mouth and began to play once more. Caden couldn't tell what the tune was, but it was a joyful sound. Of that there was no doubt. Without another word, the clansmen began their march once more, and the pipes guided their way. 2 nights passed, and the boy's hesitation around the others began to fade. He no longer held to Caden's side, rather wandering the camp, playing for those who asked it. The men accepted his silence and had taken to understand Lathan's way of speaking. Their conversations were a mixture of words from the men, nods from the boy, and music to fill the gaps. For the first time in a long time, Caden felt that he'd finally done some good in the world. That in itself was a treasure more than any silver or gold that would cross his hands. Turning his gaze away from the boy, he focused on the military camp below. A steady, late summer breeze sent banners waving on either side of the valley, where the crows would soon feast. For now, night covered the land, and the light from hundreds of campfires muted the stars above. His clan had gathered a few more to their number along the way, bringing them up to 45, yet they were but a drop in the bucket compared to the thousands gathered. His clan's liege, flying the raven banner of Dunglen, had set up camp alongside the other high lords, and was likely discussing strategy with his peers. Or getting drunk, Caden mused, likely both. Heavy steps approached, and Caden glanced up from his resting place to see Brock coming to his fire. The man was a braggart, for the most part, a known thief and stubborn as a mule. They had come close to blows several times over the years, but his blood was Highland true, and Caden would be proud to have the warrior at his side come tomorrow. "Lot more of them than I thought," Brock said as he eased himself beside the fire. Caden scanned the banners across the way. It was too dark to know which belonged to which clan, but it was clear there were far more against them than not. Aye, there are. He wasn't in the mood for company, especially the night before a battle, so he let the silence between them stretch. He had been in 3 pitched battles during his 34 years. The first when he was little older than Lathan, a few thousand on either side, and none of them lasting longer than the sun could move a handspan across the sky. This, however, was of a magnitude far greater than he'd ever seen. The death toll would surely be high. "Did you see that the McConnells moved their camp across from us? They've had blood on their minds ever since you killed Patrick before the chiefs." Caden shrugged, but he remembered the duel well, for it had nearly been his last. "Aye, I saw him." Patrick McConnell had been a fine swordsman, and a decent man if he were honest. Before the blood feud between their clans had surfaced, they'd fought alongside each other. Caden hadn't wanted to kill him, and had offered to spare the man after cutting him deep and knocking him down in the duel. Yet Patrick was too proud, and had lost his wits when his lady, sitting in attendance, called for him to stand. His pride called into question by the woman he loved, the swordsman fought without a care for his life, and Caden used almost every trick he knew to stay alive, until Patrick eventually slipped on his own blood. He recovered quick enough, but it was all the opening Caden needed to run him through. The duel had left a bad taste in his mouth, no more so than when his chief placed the pouch of silver in his hand. but there was little to be done. If he focused too long on the men he'd killed that didn't deserve it, he'd never sleep again. He still had that purse. It rested unopened in his travel pack. "His brother Ethan's over there. Had one of the lads with a bow shoot a message across the valley, meant for you." Brock pulled a rolled-up note from his pocket and offered it to Caden. "Warren read it to me. He's a-comin' for you." Caden took the note, considered reading it, then tossed it into the flames. Brock watched the flames rise for a moment as they engulfed the note. "Waste the good paper." "Then he shouldn't have sent it." "I forgot how welcoming you get before a fight." Caden said nothing. He didn't need to. Realizing the swordsman wasn't going to talk anymore, the big man got up. "I'll leave you to it, then." Caden watched him depart until he spotted Lathan walking back on the same path. Brock ruffled the boy's hair as they moved past and said something to make himself laugh before moving on. The boy almost managed to smile, then he returned to the fire. Seeing the newest addition to their clan, the swordsman suddenly felt a weight in his chest. The battle might very well go against them tomorrow. If it were a rout, the camp followers would be captured, raped, or killed. Sometimes all three. Had he not promised the boy he would be safe? Lathan rolled his new reed in his mouth and was about to give wind to his pipes when Caden held up a hand. "We need to have words, lad." The boy immediately stopped. He cocked his head to the side and stared at Caden with concern in his gray eyes. Sitting up and pulling his travel pack in front of him, Caden took the victor's purse he'd won for killing Patrick McConnell. The boy's eyes grew wide when Caden opened it. "Tomorrow may very well be the last time I draw breath, Lathan. I need you to listen. You watch the battle. And if the moment comes when our banners fall, you take what you need and run. Head east, back the way we came across the Grays. Keep to the game trails, and try not to travel during the day, at least for the first week. Don't wait to see if I make it out. Just go. You'll eventually find yourself in MacLaird land. When you do, find the nearest village and give them this." Taking off his sash, which held the pattern of Clan MacLaird, Caden offered it to the boy. Lathan, however, shook his head and pointed at the ground where he sat, eyes set in a stubborn frown. "I'm not saying it'll come to pass," Caden said, tossing the sash to the boy's lap. "But you need to be ready. I'll not have you go back to the life you had before. I made you a promise, and I intend to honor it." Lathan's face seemed to crumble for a moment, and a very real fear entered his eyes. But he continued to shake his head. Caden rose and came to sit beside the boy, placing an arm around him. "You are a clansman now, and you belong in the Greys with the rest of the MacLairds. If our fighting men fall tomorrow, there's only you, and our name must remain strong. And I see that in you, boy." A bit of the emptiness returned in Lathan's face, but he eventually nodded. "Good lad." Lathan pulled away and sat himself across the fire with his pipes. Caden figured he needed to play to calm his nerves, but the music never came, and the rest of the night was left in silence. "Hurry up!" Brock snarled, clutching his poorly wrapped hand as he staggered into the camp. "They're right fucking behind us!" Oren fell, a spray of crimson issuing from his mouth as he hit the ground. Caden tried to pick him up only to find the man had passed to the dark veil, a crimson gash across his belly. Staggering back to his feet, clutching his side where a horse had run into him, Caden hurried to catch up with Brock and the 6 remaining clansmen. They were being routed. It would soon be run down like dogs if they didn't get out of here. Caden glanced over his shoulder to see what remained of the lordly banners still holding their ground as the enemies rushed through the broken line. Meanwhile, the heavy cavalry of the High Lords rushed off the field, leaving their soldiers behind. It wouldn't be long before the last warriors fell and the camp was taken. "Grab what you need," Caden called to the survivors, trying to blink the darkness that swarmed his eyes. It took some effort to keep them open. Shadows flickered in the corners of his vision, as if the shades of the dark veil knew his time was close. and had begun to follow. Caden had taken a pommel to the head as the enemy cavalry worked through their ranks once the left flank fell. Up until then, they had the McConnells on their heels, ready to break. But with nobody to protect their side, the battle quickly turned. Now they'd be lucky to make it a mile before they were captured or killed, and he'd be damned if he spent the rest of his days working a rock quarry under another man's rule. At least the boy will be safe, he told himself, one blessing that came from his life of sin. Then, as he rounded one of the tents, he spotted Lathan standing there, alone with his pipes, by a dwindling campfire. "Damn it!" Caden spat. "I told you to run from this place!" All the blood drained from Lathan's face as he saw what was left of Clan MacLaird. Brock had unwrapped his hand, exposing 2 missing fingers, while on the other he tossed the morning star he picked up aside. The big man braced himself over the smoldering fire pit with red-hot embers still aglow. The big man's breathing picked up as he steeled himself before thrusting the bleeding nubs into the coals. "Gods be damned!" he roared as the stink of burnt flesh filled the air. The rest of the clansmen hurriedly grabbed their packs for the road, gathering what they could before it was too late. Lathan just stood there, eyes wide with terror as he raised a hand to point the direction of the battlefield. Caden looked back, blinking away growing shadows to see the last banner had fallen, and what was left of his liege's forces were in full flight. "Best be going, lad," Caden said as he grabbed his travel pack at Lathan's feet. "Come on, Brock. They'll be on us soon enough." The big man cursed and wrapped a half-clean cloth around his missing and burned fingers, but retrieved his morning star and stood. "I saw a place we can go till it calms," Brock said, watching their fellows being slaughtered as they tried to run. Then his eyes fell to the lifeless form of Orin. The big man gave a defeated nod, as if accepting the fate of his cousin and storing it away for another time. "Let's be off then." Caden shouldered his pack, sending a sharp pain through his ribs as the weight bore down. He suspected he'd broken a few, but they felt intact enough. He checked them when they weren't so close to death. "Come, Lathan," Caden said. "Grab your pipes. Let's be off." The flight from the battlefield was one of constant paranoia and loss. One of the lads had fallen behind, the half-severed tendon in his leg finally giving out as they began their climb into the grays. Having spotted soldiers in pursuit a few miles back, they all knew he'd only slowed them down, so he elected to stay behind. His brother chose to remain as well, both of them saying they'd hold the trail to buy time, which put their numbers at 5, not including the boy. Another clansman, a man by the name of Thom, had left in the night without a word to any of them. Caden didn't hold it against the man, but Brock had been furious, labeling the man a coward and swearing to kill him when they returned home. If they returned home. Lathan kept pace just fine, being the only one of them uninjured. Caden could see the determined set in the boy's face and felt a bit of pride at that. While it would have been better for the lad to have fled long ago, the fact that he stayed behind showed a loyalty the swordsman would never have expected. Reaching over, Caden squeezed the lad's shoulder. Lathan looked up at him and gave a genuine smile. It was a good smile. "Good lad," Caden told him, seeing the life flicker in the boy's eyes. They knew they were being pursued, and after 2 days, Caden had a fair idea just who was coming after them. Soldiers from a professional military wouldn't have chased them this far. This was personal, and had all the earmarks of the McConnells. He had met Ethan on the field that day of battle, but only for a moment before the cavalry hit. It was a brief exchange that told Caden everything he needed to know. Patrick's brother was no small talent with a blade. He had also seen the hate in the man's eyes. That sort of hate wouldn't be satisfied with a victory on the field of battle. He needed to wipe out the fighting men of Clan MacLaird to satisfy his bloodlust. Hate like that had no cure outside of death. What was worse, the shadows had grown in Caden's eyes. His head felt like a blacksmith's anvil, and hammer blows seemed to rain down constantly. The sunlight hurt. He found his thoughts muddled when he needed them clear. It was getting harder and harder to think straight. "Here we are," Brock said, wiping the sweat from his brow. Before them, in the saddle of the Grey Mountains, was a large, burnt-out oak. It would take at least 3 men to wrap their arms around, It was a known location. Black Oak, the locals called it. It was used as a marker to indicate folks had reached the border of MacLaird territory. A narrow game trail led up to it, surrounded by large broken stones. Only 3 men could walk abreast until you reached the tree. Beyond it lay thick forest land, as craggy peaks of the Greys receded. Black Oak? Caden asked. He should have known where the path led, and the fact he hadn't been able to figure out until now bothered the swordsman. Best protection on the run, Brock said. Stole a prize bull a few years back, and those McConnells didn't risk coming down the path. Too easy to defend, and bloody difficult to come through with numbers. The big man's eyes were wide, his skin flushed, and none of it came from the hike or the miles they'd put behind them. He'd caught fever the night before, hadn't enough rest for his body to fight it. Good place to rest, Caden said. Aye, Brock scanned the way they'd come. Better a quick rest, though, lest those McConnells try to catch up. Caden eyed the dirty wrapping around the big clansman's hand. Aye, and best get that taken care of, my friend. Brock nodded, but kept looking at their back trail. Caden and the rest moved past him and set their gear at the base of Black Oak. Fatigue was written clearly on every face, but a sense of hope had begun to rekindle. They were finally home, even if they were still miles from any town. This was MacLaird land, and it brought a sense of belonging. Caden leaned against the trunk, pulled out his canteen, noticing the heavy clouds moving overhead before offering it to Lathan. The boy drank with measured precision, knowing they had little water left. Worry not, lad. There's a stream not far off. Drink up. Lathan paused, the desire to drink more all too apparent, but instead of indulging himself, he shook his head and returned it to Caden. Caden grinned. Taking it, he drank deep before handing it back. It occurred to the swordsman once more that the boy would make a fine addition to their clan. He had a strong heart, and that was a rare commodity in one so young. This time, the boy drank his fill. Caden felt a sudden moment of dizziness, and the shadows grew deep, as if the shades were standing right in front of him. Not yet, he murmured, reaching out to brace himself, and finding Lathan holding on. The darkness receded, and the dizzy spell faded, but never vanished. The boy was staring at him now, brow furrowed. It was only then he noticed the boy had dropped his pipes to hold him up. It was the first time Caden had seen the boy treat his instrument with anything less than reverence. This is a special place, Lathan, Caden said, in an effort to divert the lad's attention. Do you know why? The boy didn't respond, and for a moment didn't let go. Pick up your pipes. I'll show you, Caden told him as they began walking toward the tree. Lathan followed behind, but he didn't allow himself to stray far from Caden's side. Once they reached the ancient oak, Caden pointed at a small hole at the base of the tree. Years back there was a fire here. Burned a great swath of the forest, and little survived. Yet this tree, Black Oak, didn't fall. It burned from within, leaving it hollow but still standing. Lathan simply watched him. Watch this, Caden said, kneeling so that his face was close to the hole. His ribs screamed at the motion, but he did it anyway. What do you think? Caden shouted into the hole, and his voice issued from several branches still attached to the tree, distorted by the echoes from within. At this, Lathan paused and listened, mouth open as he marveled at the sound. When the high winds blow, Black Oak is said to sing the songs of Daedon Sith. I heard it once, and I tell you I have yet to hear a more haunting melody. Lathan approached the lowest branch, inspecting the hollow limb just before he whistled into it. The sound bounced around, distorting until it came out completely changed. Lathan smiled and pointed at the hole. Aye, you can go inside. Should be dry enough. Easing himself into the hole and holding tightly to his pipes, the boy slid in. After a few moments of silence, there came a sound that chilled Caden's blood. A haunting melody, twisted and eerie, as it issued from the branches and holes from the burned-out tree. Aye, that's enough, boy, he said to the branch, and the pipe stopped. Caden grinned as he turned, only to find the look of fear in his fellow clansman's eyes. West, lads, it was only the boy playing his pipes. Don't think they're worried about the pipes, Caden, Brock said as he took up his morning star and pointed back the way they'd come. Marching over the top of the saddle was a band of kilted warriors wearing the colors and patterns of Clan MacLaird. A quick count put them a bit over 20, with a dark-haired warrior at their lead. As the man looked down, his eyes locked onto Caden. "You cannot run any further, Caden MacLaird!" Ethan shouted, and his men began to descend the saddle to reach them. "You cannot run any further, Caden MacLaird!" Ethan shouted, and his men began to descend the saddle to reach them. Caden felt his heart pick up at the sight of so many, knowing there was little hope to escape this time. At least, he thought, not without abandoning Lathan. Perhaps they hadn't seen him, but perhaps they had. Either way, Caden wasn't willing to risk it. They would be on him in minutes, and Caden had made a promise. He'd be damned before he broke it. The swordsman turned to his fellow clansmen. "He's after my head, lads, not yours. Best be on your way. I'll hold the path." 2 men left immediately, almost leaving their things behind. Another hesitated a moment, his hand falling to the sword at his hip, before he too joined the others. Brock came to stand beside the swordsman, morning star in hand. Shouts sounded from the McConnells coming down the saddle as they spotted the fleeing MacLairds. "We can't take them, Caden. Let's be gone. If we split up, they'll have to do the same. Better chances that way." Caden watched his soon-to-be killers. Hard men with violence in their hearts that seeped into their eyes. "No, Brock. I do not think I'll be joining you. Grab the boy. Take care of him and see he grows to be a better man than either of us." The big man said nothing, his fever-bright eyes evaluating. "As you wish," the clansman muttered, stepping back toward the tree. The big man put his mouth to one of the hollow branches. "Time to go, boy. Come on out." There was no response. "Come now, boy. Get," Brock shouted. Another moment of nothing. Then came the most haunting tune either clansman had ever heard from the Black Oak. A twisted version of the Ballad of the Last King. A tale of the Daon Sith Lord, who held the bridge at Dun Nordain against the demon horde. The sound traveled to the ears of the McConnells and slowed them, their hate becoming a smoldering thing, tempered by fear as the haunting melody filled the grey mountains around them. "Seems the boy has made his choice as a true MacLaird," Brock said, coming to stand at Caden's side. The realization hit Caden like a hammer blow to the heart, and yet the act, along with the tune, made his spirit soar. "Best be gone then, my friend. The boy has chosen to enter the dark vale at my side." The big man let out a humorless chuckle. "What? And go home to be a bad father and a coward? I think not. This is as good a place as any to die." Kicking his travel pack into the hole at the base of the tree, Caden spoke so that Lathan would hear. "You just keep playing them pipes, boy. You play them loud enough to drown out the screams and steel you'll hear. Don't stop playing. Do you hear me?" In response, the melody intensified. "Good lad," Caden whispered. Drawing his sword, Caden stood to one side of the path and Brock to the other. The McConnells had slowed, allowing their leader, Ethan, to catch up. Hearing the strange melody which seemed to fill the saddle, the warrior stepped forward. "What fell sorcery is this?" Ethan called. The shadows were darting alongside the enemy warriors, and Caden could no longer say if it was due to the trauma to his head, but he pointed his sword at the man. "I am Caden MacLaird," he shouted over the pipes. "Today I walk the path to the dark vale, and the shades sing a merry tune, honouring my arrival. Who amongst you wishes to join me?" Not a man moved as the disembodied tune filled the air between them. "Kill him!" Ethan snarled, shoving the closest McConnells into action. They came forward, but Caden could see their eyes flitting to the stones and black oak, unsure what to expect. "A grand way to end it, I suppose," Brock chuckled. "Aye," Caden said, feeling the darkness weigh on him. "That it is." Then the McConnells reached them, and the bloodletting began. Only able to come at them 3 at a time in the narrow path, The two MacLairds met their enemy head-on. Caden's blade licked out, cutting one across the neck before parrying a wild thrust that disemboweled the man. Brock held his ground, caving in the side of another's head with devastating power of his morning star. But now their enemy was on the fight, and more kept coming. All the while, the ballad became a dirge, dark tunes that accompanied darker deeds, drowning out the clash of steel and the screams of dying men. Caden caught an overhand strike and redirected it just as another man came alongside his companion. A McConnell sword opened a bloody rend in the meat of Caden's hip. Caden's riposte opened the first man's inner thigh, severing the artery there. An arrow sprouted from Brock's forearm as a lone warrior with a bow shot at them. Yet the big clansman only grew more enraged, spitting curses as he shattered the collarbone of his next opponent. The two held their ground until the McConnells broke and fell back, leaving the bodies of 6 men in their wake. Caden felt the sting of another cut along his ribs, one he hadn't felt until now. Meanwhile, the world had grown even darker, his breathing ragged as his lungs burned against his broken ribs. Another arrow darted by, the feathers caressing his cheek as it barely missed him, but sank home in Brock's neck. The big man staggered, trying to grab at the shaft on instinct with his injured hand. Seeing the big man fall to a knee, the retreating McConnell stopped. By this time, Ethan had come to the path, shouting at his men. "There, ye soft bastards! Now kill him!" Ethan snarled, drawing his sword. "Or by all that's sacred, I'll cut ye down myself." Caden reached down and grabbed the big man, helping him to his feet while the McConnells decided which fate would be worse, facing their leader or the lone swordsman. It wouldn't take them long to decide. Caden managed to settle Brock against the black oak. The shaft had gone through the meat of the big man's neck, but didn't look to have hit an artery. "I can fight," Brock choked out, trying to rise. "Just get me to my feet." Caden pressed a hand against the clansman's chest, with enough force to keep him in place. It didn't take much. The man was bleeding from several more cuts to his chest, along with 2 shafts in his body. "I need you to... Caden trailed off, unable to remember what he was going to say as another dizzy spell hit. Caden swayed before righting himself. For a moment, he wasn't sure where he was, or why he was even fighting. But he knew the dark veil was calling. He could see the shades gathered about the stones, watching him. He could hear them singing. "Lathan, Brock muttered. "We need to keep the boy safe." That was it, Caden told himself, as memories of the boy by the stream came rushing back to him. Lathan needed him. Turning from his fallen companion, Caden strode toward the path once more. The shades flitting about seemed to fill the stones on either side until all he could see were the men ahead. The path swayed, and he found himself struggling to follow it. Instead, he focused on one figure in particular, the man with hair as black as the shades calling him. Perhaps this man was a shade himself, come to claim his soul. "Come then, fell reaper! Come to me, bringers of death! You'll find no easy prey!" The nearest McConnell slowed, approaching this time without the fire of battle, but the wariness of hunting hounds as they approached a wounded mountain lion. "He's finished," he heard the dark-haired one say. "Look at him! This is what happens to those who cross us!" The words seemed jumbled now. Caden could no longer make out faces. They were all shades, but their intent was clear. They wished him to pass into the vale a broken man. Caden staggered to one side of the path and barely caught himself on one of the large stones. This was it. It would be so easy to sit down and to let the darkness envelop him. Yet the pipes called to him, urging him to stand, and he would not leave them wanting. Summoning what strength he had left, Caden charged. He no longer fought with practiced skill, rather fueled by the fire of his soul. Their blades licked out, spreading hot agony throughout his body, but his sword became death, and the shades that stood before him wavered and broke, all save for the one with black hair. When they met, their blades clashed 3 times before touching flesh. Then Caden found himself atop the man, his sword buried in the shade's chest, just as its blade entered his own. Then the shadows receded, and Caden found himself staring down at Ethan.
Patrick?
The man gurgled before his eyes went wide, and then he stared at nothing. The world grew dark, and darker still. Caden felt himself falling. He could hear voices around him, but there was nothing left to him. When his vision faded, all he could hear was the haunting melody of MacLaird pipes as the shades welcomed him home. Brock watched Caden's mad charge through fevered eyes. The swordsman had fought like a man possessed, and the bodies in his wake were a testament of his passing. Brock tried to rise, but there was little fight in him now. The McConnells who survived stared at the motionless body of Caden MacLaird with reverence and fear, as if the man might rise once more. They'd get over it eventually, Brock knew, and come to finish him off, along with the boy. He had made a promise to a dying man. Brock knew he wasn't much when it came to being a man. He was a cheat, a liar, and seldom passed an opportunity to steal cattle, even from his own kin. Yet what he witnessed today struck a chord in him, and he remembered Caden's words when the boy had become part of their clan. When you speak, may your words be true. May your deeds be open for all to see, to ensure no shade enters your soul. Keep your wits when others lose their own, and stand for the clan before all else. Accept this, and you will be a MacLaird. Brock had broken many promises in his life, but today was different. Today he would honor the promise and keep the boy safe. Leveraging himself against Black Oak, the boy's pipe still filled the air. He couldn't fight. This he knew beyond a doubt. It took everything he had just to stand and lift the weapon. But the McConnells were about to break. They just needed more incentive. Taking a deep breath that brought fresh agony from his many wounds, he called out,
I hear ye, shades. Let us gather the rest and go beyond the veil.
With every effort his fever-racked body could manage, he took a few steps toward the remaining McConnells. The fear that Caden had instilled, reinforced by the pipes echoing from the Black Oak, and his words now, were enough that the McConnells turned and fled back up the saddle. Brock kept his feet, determined to remain that way until they were out of sight, though his body screamed for release. When the last enemy warrior vanished from the ridge, he collapsed. Waking, the clansman found himself staring up at the night sky, a fire at his feet, and blankets lay atop him. His body was racked in pain, and he could feel the fiery grip of the fever still in him. He reached up to his neck only to find the arrow had been removed, and his injured hand had been wrapped in new cloth. A new sound, broken and lonely, drifted through the night, and the big man shifted himself to see what was making it. The boy Lathan was crouched over Caden's body. A mournful cry replaced the pipes he used so often. It was primal and raw, as a voice unaccustomed to speech would be. Brock tried to call him over, but fatigue took hold, and he slept. When next he woke, it was midday, and the boy was at his side, a bowl of broth in hand. He offered it to Brock. This time, he was able to move and accepted the bowl in his good hand. His stomach protested the thin liquid at first, but he managed to get half of it down before he had to stop. You did this, Brock croaked, the pain in his neck flaring as he spoke. Lathan nodded and stared at him. Brock could see he now wore Caden's clan sash over his shoulder, but said nothing. It fit him proper, and that was a fine thing. You have my thanks. Brock sat up now, feeling a bit of new life, despite his wounds, and saw that Caden's body had been removed from where it had fallen. Where is he? He asked. Lathan's eyes faded, and he pointed at Black Oak. The meaning was clear, and Brock could think of no better resting place for the warrior. A fine deed, he said, the pain in his neck slowly growing the more he spoke. He should stop, but this was a time for words. The boy needed to hear them. It was the least he could do, considering the lad had saved his life. A few more days, and we'll leave, he said, putting as much confidence as he could muster in his weakened state. You're a MacLaird.
So my home is open to you.
The boy considered his words, then shook his head and pulled a heavy purse from Caden's travel pack. Lathan pointed from the pouch to himself. Brock took a moment to piece his meaning together, but when he did, he felt a bit of his good nature return.
A place of your own?
The boy nodded. Then tentatively, he opened his mouth and uttered one word. Aye. It was little more than a whisper, but Brock thought it sounded like a good voice, a fitting one.
You've more than earned it, lad. Now, let me rest. We'll soon be gone from this place.
Lathan left him then, walking over to pick up his pipes and sit beside Black Oak. As Brock allowed himself to rest, he heard the sound of pipes playing a hopeful tune, just as sleep took hold.